Welcome to Home Care Connection, a program brought to you by the Rutland Area Visiting Nurse Association and Hospice. Home Care Connection brings you information about caring for yourself or loved ones at home. We want to let you know about health care and wellness programs and services available to you, and what new medical advances can help you ensure that you remain safe and independent in the comfort of your home. Today on Home Care Connection, we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's disease. Specifically, how to care for and communicate with a loved one who suffers from this disease. It's painfully difficult to watch a family member seemingly waste away in their own mind. And what often happens is that many relatives and friends distance themselves from their loved ones suffering with the disease. Living with Alzheimer's can be a crippling experience, both for the person suffering from the disease and for their families. One of the best ways to ease the pain and isolation of Alzheimer's is to get information and to learn as much as you can about how to care for a person with Alzheimer's. We hope that you will stay with us for this show. I'm very pleased to welcome Paula Patorti to our show. Paula is the owner and operator of Our Home Residential Homes and has worked intensively with people who suffer from dementia and from Alzheimer's disease. Paula, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You started Our House because of your personal experiences.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Sure. I was a banker for 25 years and loved it very much. I am married to an individual who is an only child. His mom had lived in New York City for more than 20 years, and her second husband suddenly and unexpectedly died. We went to New York to take care of business and asked Angie, do you want to stay here? Do you want to come home? And she told us in Italian, metta baul, that she was afraid. And that was probably our first cue that something was a little different. We brought her home with us, and about 6 years later, we ended our visit. Pretty soon into her coming to live with us, we realized there were a lot of things that were very different about Angie. And it was at a time when we had started hearing the word Alzheimer's, but really it wasn't a household word at that point. President Reagan had been diagnosed, and that was kind of how everybody was talking about it, how the word was spreading. We had done a little bit of research, and we kind of suspected that was what was going on with my mother-in-law. Some very different things. You know, old Italian lady made a sauce without a recipe, like there was no tomorrow. And one of the first things that she did was we came home one afternoon and she was trying to make sauce, and she had opened tomato soup instead of tomatoes, crushed tomatoes. Yeah. That was pretty bizarre. And then a little while after that, she was going to heat something up on our glass top stove and used a stoneware bowl to do that. So it was, we were pretty desperate, you know, at that time. We just thought, what is going on with her? I think as a family, the first thing that you do is you put that wall of defense up and you go, why is she acting this way? Right. You know, she's being so spiteful. It didn't take long for us to realize that this was not Angie. It was certainly out of her control. We had a wonderful, there was a Dr. David Cross who was in town then. We all loved very, very much. And he was kind of having family members that were approaching him with similar situations call us for advice. And I just thought that was kind of bizarre. And this is before HIPAA, obviously. So I called him and I questioned him. And I said, you know, why are you having families call us? And he said, well, you know, you're really the only family that we know that have stuck it out, have been able to stick it out. And I have to preface it with that because we knew that we were very fortunate that we had a life that would allow us to have one of us stay home and be a primary caregiver for Angie while the rest of, you know, the kids and myself went out to work.
Sure.
So my husband, Pat, actually was her primary caregiver.
Oh, okay.
I was at the time a sales rep for the bank and was listening to motivators in the car, and one of the motivators had this message that just kept going over and over in my head, which was, Usually your what you're destined for in life is staring you right in the face, and you don't really take it as an opportunity. It's just kind of there. So we often miss our opportunities or our callings, if you will, in life. So I had said this to my husband on the way out to work one morning. I said, you know, maybe this is what we need to do with our lives, is share our knowledge, share what we've learned about this disease with other families that are facing the same situation. Well, my husband's an Aquarian, and by the time I got home that evening, he had located the Department of Licensing and Protection and had asked for the regulations to open a care home to be mailed to us. So I received them fairly quickly and kind of shrugged it off, just thinking, yeah, right, like that's not what we're going to do. But it was really it became very passionate to both of us. We just felt like this is what we need to do. The things that we were being challenged with my mother-in-law, she was a great teacher. I actually tell our staff that today, that Angie pretty much did anything that anybody could ever do, so that the challenges were already we'd already met them head on. Right. And we felt that we could be helpful in helping other people just to realize if they can't take care of them, where they can be well cared for in a home-like environment, as opposed to more of an institutional, something with more of an institutional flavor. And I think that really came out of, you know, I'm rewinding obviously years here, but we had 3 sons, and 2 of the boys were in youth hockey, and anybody who does youth hockey knows that you do a lot of traveling. So as her disease progressed, there were 3 opportunities where we knew we couldn't take Angie with us, and we had to do respite stints with her at local facilities. It just became pretty obvious to us that it really wasn't fair for these folks to be commingled. We really wanted to maintain my mother-in-law's dignity and humility, and the disease robs them of a lot of that. Certainly these are things that they wouldn't do if they had the choice. Right. And same with the folks that are aging but cognitively well. It just felt that they were almost on alarm that they may wake up tomorrow and that may be them. They may be doing these bizarre behaviors. So long story short, from the day that Pat got the regulations in the mail, it was about 3 years, because I had to become certified with the state. Sure. And we had to find a house, and we had to get the blessing of all of the powers that be, the labor and industry and licensing and protection. And we also were kind of breaking the mold. We are a level 3 residential care home, but when we became licensed, we said to them, we're calling it our house because this is going to be their last home. We really want to see our residents through end of life right here. And they thought it was a great idea, but they really didn't have that model in place. And so I said to a lady up there who's not doing this job anymore, but I did say to her, let us be that model, you know, let us just see if that won't work. I think there are some real obvious things that come into play with that. Once someone is full-blown into Alzheimer's, there are some pretty obvious things that may not be so obvious with someone who is cognitively well and physically impaired. One being advanced directives. Yep. If something happens, if your mom's heart stops, or if she stops breathing, do you want us to resuscitate? Do you want us to go through these life-saving techniques, or do we allow nature to take its course? And I think that first of all, we had to make that decision as a family with my mother-in-law, and we really just went to that through her eyes. We said, what would she want? How would she want this to happen? And there was another doctor in town also who really helped us to make that decision by saying, here's the reality of CPR on an elderly person. You know, so if we do bring them back, maybe there's broken rib, what quality of life? So with all of that in place, and with all of the families that we meet with today, that's a big part of it, is let nature take its course, give them their comfort, their dignity, respect, and good food, a clean house, and tender caregivers. And that's what we do.
And your mother-in-law was with you at home and then in our home?
She was. Angie actually lived with us in our own house for about 5 years, and that was during the time that we were also deciding to build one of these houses and had it off the ground. She actually was end stage when we were close to opening, and we would talk to her anyway, even though she wasn't talking back.
Yeah.
Though we felt that with her eyes, she was comprehending what we were telling her. We were telling her we were building a home to welcome people that had the same kind of disease that she had. And we opened our first house March 13th. We brought our first resident in, and on the 14th, we brought Angie in, and that was hard for us. Yeah. Even though we owned it, it still was hard. And we had an open house, and on March 30th, she died. So she just waited for us to, you know,
get it going.
Yeah.
She knew she was the motivating.
She did, and today we tell all of the folks that we know that our house was born in her honor and in her memory. It lives on each day.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, and that time frame too. That's not an uncommon amount of time for a person to go from the early stages of onset of Alzheimer's to the end. Is in that ballpark of 5 to.
Well, it can be up to 20 years,
Yeah.
but of course the symptoms were there long before that.
Right.
We just didn't see them,
Right.
and hindsight's worth $1 million.
Yeah.
That little phrase is really very, very true. Most of the families who are dealing with someone who has this disease right now can probably go back even 5 years before diagnosis and say, you know, that might have been a little bit of what was going on in the beginning.
Stages.
Yeah.
Because they are very subtle.
Very, very subtle.
You know, people use the term dementia and Alzheimer's sometimes to mean the same thing. And from your perspective, is there a difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And if so?
Yeah, I try to simplify things. I will try to simplify things. And I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a nurse or a doctor. But in my understanding, dementia is basically the process of the brain shrinking. There are lots of different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is one of those types. There's dementia that's caused from drug or alcohol abuse. There's dementia that's caused from Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, Lewy body, Pick's disease. There's just a lot of it out there. In my opinion, Alzheimer's is the package. It is the challenges. I like to use some comparisons, if you will.
Sure.
Had a little lady who recently was one of my favorites, and should never say that, but of course I fall in love with all of them. But she was 101, and I think if I lived in her day, we would have been best friends because we had a lot of things in common. That's probably why I felt so close to her. But she had old-timers. She didn't have Alzheimer's. And here's the difference. She would tell you the same story over and over if you trigger it, if you ask it. But she really didn't ever wander, do things inappropriately when it came to, you know, bathroom. And I think that those are the behaviors that really do set Alzheimer's aside. And I guess you can put it in the same category with Lewy body, because that's probably, knowing what we know now, that's probably more what Angie had, was Lewy body dementia, which is kind of, again, simplifying a combination of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's type dementias together.
Yeah.
So she was a great teacher. Everything was extreme. She used her bedroom windows as doors. You know, she would take off in the middle of the night and go on a little road trip with a stack of folded laundry and a couple of stuffed animals, you know, out her bedroom window. So those are things that were imperative, that we knew that while we were caring for her in itself, of course we wanted to keep her safe.
Yeah, and there are stages to Alzheimer's, are there not?
There are, and again, I'm a real keep it simple kind of person. I see 3 stages. I basically talk to our families in 3 stages: the early stages, the mid stages, and then the end stage. Just again to simplify, I've heard doctors define 9 different stages, and in that world it probably makes a lot of difference, because if you're, for instance, looking at the plaques and tangles on the brain scans, then you probably do see much more than you do outwardly when you're just dealing with them on a personality basis.
But behaviorally 3 stages does seem to be a fairly...
I think so. Again, I just think that it's a little easier to put it that way. And the early stage, and then of course the early part of the mid stage, I feel is the most troubling for the individual and the families. This is when they're having lucid moments still, and they're realizing that maybe they've done something inappropriate behavior-wise, or they have said something like call a dog a cat, or he or she, or
Right.
a daughter a mother.
Yep.
That's all very, very common. One of the things we learned from Angie was don't go there. Just leave it. Don't correct her, redirect her.
Right.
And that's very important with people with Alzheimer's, any type of dementia, truly. But with Alzheimer's, I think they require more of that.
Yeah, and if you could, maybe just tell us a little bit about from your experience, or sort of what are the warning stages, perhaps, of early.
Or early onset. That's really tough because, as I said, we didn't pick those up until through hindsight.
Right.
And I think that, I guess what I would say is with Angie, she came to this country at 30 years old and she didn't speak the language. She became pretty fluent in English. I did not speak fluent Italian, my husband did. But one of the first things that she forgot was how to speak Italian, or excuse me, how to speak English.
Oh.
And she would speak to everyone in Italian. And then I would stop her and say, Ma, you need to speak English. And in Italian, she would respond by saying, oh, forget you, you're crazy. I'm speaking English in Italian. So I learned how to say that. Myself and my children all learned quite a bit of Italian because we were forced to.
Sure.
So we just decided go there and be there. Do what she thinks she's doing. Go along. Have fun with it. Validate her thoughts, and it certainly became much more enjoyable and much easier for her. And as her disease progressed, we had that already in place, so we had fun with it. And I encourage other families to try to do that, but it's very, very difficult, especially in those first stages, because again, I think it's most difficult for the family. You have known that person, all those years, especially a spouse.
Sure.
And you just think that, they're having a bad day, or they're being spiteful, or they don't want to cooperate. But very shortly you will realize that they have really no control over what they're executing, and therefore you should try to succumb to their needs as opposed to trying to change their ways.
And that piece that you're speaking to, which certainly we should talk about in more detail in a moment, but I mean, that is a really important aspect of the provision of care for somebody with Alzheimer's, is to realize that maybe when it is simply an isolated sort of error, like, again, calling the cat a dog, maybe fine, that might be just something, but as you start to notice that there is a bit more of a pattern to the behavior, that in fact, just being aware of the fact that it could be Alzheimer's has to impact the way you start to interact with that person.
It does, but that also can work in reverse. And I love this. I had one of the local doctors said this to me. I hear lots of times folks that are elderly say, I don't want to get that disease, or maybe I have Alzheimer's, because they do something like unload the dishwasher and put the dishes in where the cups go.
Right.
But then they realize it and they're like, oh, what was I thinking? And they reverse that. Or you put your ice cream away in the dish cupboard at night.
Right.
And most of us, many of us have done these types of things, but we retract it. We're like, oh, what was I thinking? And now if you wake up in the morning and the ice cream is all melted, that's when you have trouble. That's when probably you didn't realize what you were doing.
Absolutely.
And so it probably is a blatant sign that there's something going on.
So then let's talk a little bit about communication with a patient, with an Alzheimer's patient. Any?
I think this is probably I love this. I feel, I like challenges, and I think that there's some real important things. First of all, it has to be done individually. You really have to know this individual and know where they are in their disease. There are words that they no longer can muster up. There are descriptions they can no longer articulate. So if you know them well, and as a caregiver certainly, but as a spouse or a child, you can pretty much get an idea of what they're thinking by body language. So you really do have to pay close attention to what they're telling you. Like I have a lady who has said, I go to see Mom and she knows me. I know she knows me, but she calls me by her sister's name. You know, is that really a big deal? Is that really important? It's more important. And so with that, what I'm saying is a lot of people they tend to go to correct. They will say, come into the room and say, Mom, do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Who am I? You know,
right.
Which makes these folks very uncomfortable because they are not sure that they do know. And if they're not able to muster up that information, then they'll be defensive. And being defensive can lead to combative behaviors. And so communication, tender touch, eye contact, soft touch with the voice, maybe even a touch to you physically on the approach. It's all very imperative, and it's relevant when it comes to what response you're going to get from them.
Sure.
So that's important, and I love that kind of a challenge.
And it's fair to say that that one of the aspects of Alzheimer's is that it does impact a person's cognitive skills, cognitive abilities.
Absolutely.
And these changes in behavior really are just simply symptoms, if you will, of the disease. Not you know, I don't remember necessarily who my son is anymore, even if that's the way it's coming out.
Right.
So to confront them on that is only going to lead,
because
in their minds perhaps even, they aren't misstating. They are just,
that's right.
You know, and somebody had said to me once that if you think that an Alzheimer patient isn't there anymore, that's not a good premise to make, because actually they are in there.
Absolutely.
And even though they are sort of losing cognitive skills, the person who they were is still in there.
Yes.
And when our behaviors are such that we are challenging them or confronting in that way, that in fact, you know, there's a piece of them that understands that you're not understanding them, and that does lead to that agitation.
It does. It really does. And so that's why when anyone is talking with someone with Alzheimer's disease, and you don't ask questions, you may give them a leading statement. For instance, if somebody is refusing daily hygiene, they don't want the shower, and I know this is a big question. Lots of people come up with this. There are lots of reasons that we can all come to think of that they may not want that shower, and you actually shared with me a great analogy earlier. I feel that often because their sensory itself has been challenged, they know that you're putting water on them, but they can't tell, is it hot, is it cold?
Right.
They're not really sure if this is a good feeling. So safety is always no. Safety is no.
Right.
So if you go up and you say, Mom, you know, want to take a shower now? She's going to say no.
Right.
She's going to say no, and for a lot of reasons. So use a different approach. Say, would you come with me? Could you help me? And usually people just by nature want to help you.
Yeah.
And so if you're more inclined to use that type of an approach with them, you're going to get them to take your hand and head for that shower. Now, that doesn't mean that once you get in that shower, they're not going to turn around and head for that door as quick as they got there. So you may even have to fine point that a little bit more, to trim that down. I mean, we know that there are certain people that if there are clothes in the bathroom, you're not going to get them in the shower. So all the clothes have to be outside of the bathroom, both the dirty and the clean, and maybe even the towels, until the shower is resolved, and then you can reach for the clothes and do it that way.
Sure.
Some would prefer to sit. Some do like baths over showers.
Right. Or even sponge baths, for that matter.
And even sponge baths. And lots of times people will come to us and literally have not stepped foot in a bath or a shower for more than a year. And so they can get washed up. But part of this, just like you had said earlier, part of this goes to where they were when they were younger. And this generation didn't take a daily shower.
Right, that's true too.
The folks who are right now, you know, facing this disease, the older folks, they didn't take a daily shower. They took a shower once a week. As a matter of fact, I believe,
whether needed or not.
Yes, and I believe there still is something on the books in the city of Rutland that says every citizen of Rutland has to take a bath on Saturday nights.
Really?
Yeah, we should look into that.
We
but
have to look into
I
that.
know that years ago it was still actually on the books, which is kind of neat. So take that and then factor that into, you're trying to get this person to take a shower 2-3 times a week, or if not every day. That's not their nature. That's not what they were accustomed to.
Right.
So don't try to change that.
No, and again, it absolutely makes sense to me. A lot of folks with Alzheimer's tend to, and I think it's clearly part of the disease, to not remember things that happened 5 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago, but are crystal clear on things that happened 20 years ago and 30 years ago.
Yes.
And tend to talk a lot about the past, almost even in the present. Is that a good thing for caretakers to?
Yeah, I do, because this is where they're happy. Obviously, and with my mother-in-law, we would ask her, where are you? And she'd say, in Italia, And we would all laugh because none of us had ever been to Italy, including my own husband. But we were in Italia,
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to say, no, Ma, you came here, blah, blah, blah. Then you moved to New York, then you came back. We would just go to Italia with her and just be there with her and make a little bit of an adventure out of it. And it was really fun.
Yeah.
And that is what we do. We like to know a lot, and of course families have the upper hand because they know a lot of the history.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they don't know enough of the history, the kids especially. There are things about my mom and dad when they were young that they never shared with me.
Right.
But it might come out if they have Alzheimer's disease, and at that time, the caregiver can shed a little light on sharing a little information with the children that maybe they never knew. And some of it's really important.
Oh, absolutely.
Really important stuff that they just felt that it was inappropriate or unnecessary to share.
One of the things that you hear a lot, concerns that a caregiver might have, whether a family member or a professional caregiver, is that the person seems to be aggressive or seems to be combative in some cases. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience is about that? Do you have any insights about?
I can. I mean, I truly believe that it's all relevant to environment, what's going on, who's there, what's happening in the house, when these things happen, what are you trying to do? And, going back to that, the lady that walks in and goes, hi, do you know who I am? I'm your daughter. Do you know me? What's my name? Right. That sets the stage, really, for the combative and the agitation. Using a tender approach, you've got to make eye contact when you're going to talk with one of these folks. First of all, because they are cognitively challenged. They are kind of in a whirlwind in their mind. Where am I? What am I doing? That kind of thing. And just imagine all of that going on and then somebody, sticking their face in your face going, do you know who I am? What's my name? I'm your daughter. That's not important,
right.
What's important is to give them comfort. So I truly believe that when people become agitated and maybe more, again, combative, there's something that's gone on. And it could be something as simple as, I go to the old analogy when you were little kids and people called you names and you stood up and said, I'm rubber and you're glue, whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. Those actually happen to people with Alzheimer's disease, at least in our experience.
Sure.
So we don't talk about things that might upset them in front of them. Your boyfriend cheating on you, or you went out and partied too much. Those are things that really are disconcerting to them,
right.
but also may become their real life. My boyfriend cheated on me.
Sure.
And they can have a really bad day if something like that occurs.
Yeah. What steps should a family take if they suspect that a member of the family has Alzheimer's?
I guess it depends on the family. I think that certainly the doctor, and we have some wonderful, wonderful doctors in this area, very understanding, very welcoming to these folks and their families, and I give them all sorts of credit. I think that first and foremost, they would need to see a doctor, and a doctor may refer them to a neurologist. They may go to a memory clinic. That's certainly a fine thing to do. I feel here in Rutland it's kind of tough. We just don't have a memory clinic that's geographically close to us, and traveling becomes very, very, very challenging for these folks once they reach a certain stage.
Absolutely.
Just being in the car for an hour and a half,
question.
saying nothing about, then going through the gamut. And I think the memory clinics are imperative. I think it's wonderful. But I think just keeping it simple and trying to keep them in check with their comfort levels.
Thank you. Paula, thank you for being on the show today. You've been very informative, helpful about helping us help people understand how to cope with people with Alzheimer's. Ravna's hospice program and Ravna's hospice program and palliative care program are hosting a film entitled "There is a Bridge," about communicating with people with Alzheimer's disease. The film will be shown on Thursday, March 4th at the hospital. There's a phone number on the screen if you'd like more information. If you or a loved one want more information, you can contact the Vermont chapter of the Alzheimer's Association at area code 802-316-3839 or log on to their website at www.alz.org/Vermont/. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Harry Snyder, and I'll see you next time on Home Care Connection.